As many of you know, myself, Jake, and Chris, we're constantly flying business. We're flying first class. Obviously. But the problem with this, of course, is often when this happens, it's the airlines obviously put us on there, and they treat us like gods and kings because, obviously. But the problem is that can in many ways skew your opinion, because I sort of think this is not the same experience as the punters get. This is not the same experience the little people get, and that's always something that's made our jobs very difficult. But Rob here, he works for Defence Connect. He went on a quite incredible trip a couple of weeks ago, and his end destination was Hamburg, I believe, to look at some shipyards. But he was also flew this trip flying a variety of airlines, a variety of aircraft, and also some fantastic business class experiences, including one part of his trip being on QF1. Now, when I heard this, I thought we've got one of our guys going incognito who can talk us through this experience. This is proper journalism at its absolute finest. Rob, start at the beginning and talk us through your trip.
Thanks, Adam. So it's very much undercover. We don't all have that luxury of being recognised when we step on the flight. But when you say one part of the trip was with QF1, that was a significant part. That was 24 hours.
24 hours.
So that was from Sydney through Shanghai Airport in Singapore through to Heathrow in London. And let me tell you, that's a great aircraft. And flying business class on there, I was able to work quite well. The workstations they have, great for laptops, good space there. The seats are pretty comfy, but there was some difficulties in that there were some delays heading out of Sydney, and a couple of hours there sort of spent on the runway just seeing what would happen after some faults with the air conditioning there. And that delay caused so much of a delay that by the time I got to Heathrow, I had previously had a 5-hour stopover in Heathrow, and that was cut down to 2 hours.
Wow. Well, I suppose at least that you didn't miss your next flight. So in a sense, that worked out quite well. How would you kind of rate how the staff and the crew reacted to that delay? Because you're on the tarmac. Were you well looked after in that time?
Yeah, so we were. We were offered sort of, beverages when we got on. This is in business class, of course. And the seats, as I said before, they were quite comfy. There wasn't a lot of information being given around apart from the fact that it was an issue with the aircon. And when we did get off the ground and get to Singapore, that issue obviously wasn't resolved because we had then more of a delay there before heading out to London. So I would say that, as sort of my first experience in terms of business class, that was quite good. And it's certainly a huge step up from economy. But the delay was sort of definitely something I was thinking about at the time.
So what's interesting is that QF1 business, arguably, you're not just selling the airline, you're selling Australia here. This is the kind of the most iconic, the most important thing. Talk us a little bit more about this. How would you rate the food? Because Qantas and its Neil Perry menu, very, very, don't snigger, Chris, they're very, very big on this. How would you rate this? How would you review it?
Considering it was a 24-hour flight, I actually think I slept through most of that part. But I will say that in the return flight, which was a A380 with Emirates, which was operated by Emirates, that there was a completely different experience because the Emirates seats have more of a tourism feel for business class. They don't have that working space on the way back. So certainly heading there on QF1, I was able to work on a laptop and it was an easy thing to do. Completely different experience on the way back.
And then talk us through the next part of your trip, because you had a variety of aircraft and a variety of airlines.
So heading through to the British Airways, so this is from Heathrow to Hamburg. This is the A319 aircraft. That was a 2-hour flight, fairly sort of self-explanatory. The business class was checked out much the same as the QF1, and I probably preferred that than the flight back as well. That's
quite interesting.
Wow.
Are you saying that British Airways, that the English are trumping the Australians? It does seem to be what you're suggesting here.
I think they are, yes.
Wow.
So I think that there's an approach there that says in Europe, oh, we need a business class for business people, so they need somewhere to work. They need that sort of peace and quiet to be able to work and somewhere to plug in. And I think there's definitely some airlines out there, like the flight that I got back with Emirates, where it doesn't have the same professional workspace, and it's more about the comfort and luxury level, the gold bling everywhere, the bar, things like that.
One of the things that's quite interesting is that a lot of how we view long-haul flying and international flights is based on a reputation from big airlines like Emirates, Qantas, British Airways, pre-COVID. And what we know during COVID is that a lot of airlines obviously let go a lot of people, or they had a lot of new staff on board, that kind of cuts were made. And so I think often what we are finding is that at the other side of COVID, the kind of almost the rankings of what airline is good is changed a lot. I'm very surprised to hear you rave about British Airways, because arguably this is an airline that had a poor reputation. I know it's struggled for a lot of time in the UK. Emirates would have been an airline you would have thought had the very best reputation. But your experiences suggest that actually British Airways was the best. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. So, and that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I hadn't even really heard of British Airways in Australia. But certainly the advertising you get hit with here for Emirates is huge. Any major sporting event, you're getting some Emirates advertising. And so it was a huge shock to get on that flight back and think, well, this wasn't as good on the way there. It sort of didn't have the same facilities, and it's obviously for a different purpose. I don't know whether that's changed during COVID, but it definitely seemed like there was less of a focus on being able to work and get things done. And even it came down to small things like being able to plug in with a charger using your laptop into the flight. On the flight back, which was that Emirates flight, the 14 hours, my charger wasn't compatible with the aircraft. And I had an Australian outlet. I had an adapter with a European adapter. So I had everything there to be able to plug it in, but the voltage wasn't powerful enough in the system to actually charge my laptop.
And that's extraordinary, because without being smart, if you're traveling business, the reason you're meant to be traveling business is so that you can work during the flight. That's the rationale for the companies paying for it. If you can't even charge your laptop, that's a big thing to get wrong.
Yeah. And bearing in mind, I have a pretty heavy-duty laptop, but I still thought, this is a bit average, you're sort of running it down to the lowest percentage possible at work, and then thinking, well, I'd have no other choice now. It's time to watch some sort of outdated movies on the TV.
I want to bring you in here, Chris, as people may or not be aware. Chris has held every single job in aviation other than flying the plane. But one of the jobs he had for the bulk of his career, for a large part of his career, was being a cabin crew manager. Chris, does this feedback surprise you? Because you've obviously been on hundreds or thousands of flights. What's your kind of thinking of Rob's review here?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting, and I guess product is subjective. Rob was exactly right. Emirates is extremely heavy-handed with advertising and marketing in the Australian market, but they do that globally. Emirates is known as a global airline. They try and get their finger in as many pies as they can with sporting teams and sporting ventures all around the world, as do all big three Middle Eastern carriers, Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways as well. To hear that Rob had a more enjoyable experience on a Qantas aircraft than an Emirates aircraft is surprising, because traditionally it's the flip side. But Rob is correct. The Emirates product is themed around the luxury and the opulence of the product that you're purchasing and paying for. But look, there's also been a number of reports recently from both Australia and New Zealand where Emirates have been sued for not having the product advertised, or an out-of-date business class product. So, yeah, I'm not surprised by it. It's interesting to hear British Airways, though.
One of the I'm interested to hear that, because obviously being another POM in Australia, even British Airways has a bad reputation, or had a bad reputation in the UK for 10, 15 years. And the reason was because sort of 15, probably more than this, 20 years ago, you had this kind of low-cost revolution around Europe. You had, Ryanair and EasyJet and all of these airlines. And British Airways kind of got stuck in the middle. They didn't know whether they were meant to go and try to compete with these low-cost carriers, or whether they were meant to keep their kind of premium service. And what happened is they kind of got a bit stuck in the middle. There was plenty of strikes, a lot of disruption, and it felt that their reputation really, really went downhill. I know they have, I think it was in the last year or so, got a new CEO, and his kind of big thrust is to try to make British Airways a true premium airline again, really invest in customer service and all of those little perks that he feels has gone missing. And it's interesting, your feedback here, Rob, suggests that they actually are doing quite a good job.
Yeah, so I think part of this as well, from my own experience, was that with QF1 and the British Airways flight, the actual seating is you get your own sort of booth, that's, I'm not sure if it's leather or not, it was some sort of black, upholstery. And it's very much like one of those lazy boy sort of chairs, it's got a bit more room to it and it sort of folds down. And then when I came back through the Emirates flight, very much an upright thing, and you're a bit closer to the person next to you. You don't have quite as much room in terms of around, your arms, things like that, where you would normally want to, have a laptop on the desk in front of you and then maybe have a mouse or something like that. You don't have that room. So that upright approach, maybe that's better for looking out the window and for drinking a champagne, but that's not really what I wanted when I was wanting to work.
Yeah. Well, I've sat in business class on a Qantas Dreamliner before. To be clear, I haven't flown business class. I just sat there for a bit. It was
That's
nice.
a bit different though, yeah.
Well, it was nice for the 10, 20 seconds that I sat in it. But I have had an experience with I have flown with Emirates before in economy because the company that was flying me out there wasn't going to pay for business. But
not the company you're currently at, to be very clear.
No. That sitting in that business class seat on the Dreamliner on the tarmac's probably the closest I'm ever going to get. But with that Emirates flight, I do sympathise with your story of the delay. Though your delay was with Qantas, obviously, but I did fly Emirates to Zurich via Dubai for a previous job in a previous life, and we were delayed coming out of Sydney, and so it wasn't even a 2-hour stopover in Dubai. It was literally race us through the airport to get to the connecting flight to Zurich, and my baggage didn't arrive till the following day. So that was my experience with Emirates. To be clear, the flights were nice, but it was all sort of marred by the baggage thing.
I would like to make a call out here, and this is a problem that I ran into with Emirates during the trip. And I don't want to rain on their parade, but this was a fundamental issue that I think probably needs to be resolved in the aircraft industry. I'm not sure how widespread it is, but when we were in Hamburg Airport and you have your ticket and you're checking into the desk, you obviously want to get your bag put through and then head to a lounge. And this is business class people and economy. They want to do the same thing. You want to go about your way and get out of that main entrance hall, which is chock full of people. That didn't actually happen because I found that the aircrew that were manning the front desk, they were counting down to when that front desk opened. And there was no way that I could check my bag in early and then go to a lounge. Because if I got to the lounge with my bag, that meant that I didn't have any ID or ticket to get into the actual lounge. And I needed to get that from the actual Emirates stand, which wasn't open. So it was a catch-22. I'm stuck in the main hall with everyone else, hundreds of people. Everyone's waiting for the same thing. And at that point, I did see sort of the economy passengers as well being sort of ushered out of the line because it's not open yet. That terminal wasn't open yet.
Must be nice to get to go to a lounge. Never been to a lounge. Been to the gate lounge.
If any airlines are listening, we can't have that situation to go anymore. Someone get the man into a lounge.
Got to get into a lounge
Someone
at
get
some
him into
point.
a lounge.
There's airlines opening lounges all over the place. Got to get me into a lounge. By the way, on the subject we touched earlier, you mentioned about England trumping Australia. I well know that the Matildas are going to be playing England soon, so we'll see who trumps who.
Are they though?
Yeah.
I know they're both through to the quarters. Is that going to be?
I'm pretty sure that the Matildas are going to be playing England. They're going to be facing England in the semis.
Well, commiserations on that loss.
I see you're practicing what to say to yourself in the mirror.
Right, now, before we wrap up this section of the show, Rob, obviously Rob is a modest man, a man of the people, down to earth, working class hero. We all know, salt of the earth kind of fella. You spoke to me before. You said you'd never flown business before. How much better do you think the business class experience is? Would you ever be tempted to pay out of your own packet for it, your own wallet for it, or is it just the icing on the cake? Does it make that much of a difference?
I do think it makes a huge difference, and any of the business classes I went on were a huge improvement over economy. In saying that, there was a huge cost involved, and I think that business class for me personally on my own personal trip would only be worth it if I had a hugely long haul flight that was 24 hours. Now, I've flown to the US for 13 hours in economy, and I think I'd do that again. But if it was going to be more than that, I might consider upgrading to business class now that I have been on the trip. I would also like to add that I didn't only take business class on the trip. There was an economy flight with Wizz Air Hungary, and that's an A320. That was from Varna in Bulgaria back to Hamburg, Germany. And I will say that there was some issues highlighted on that flight, which I found just crazy, that, passengers, it was almost an understanding that when you land, before the seatbelt button goes off, the light, everyone's sort of standing up and racing for the exit with nowhere to go. And I thought that was incredibly odd. And I also thought it was odd that people getting onto that flight had their duty-free bags, these yellow duty-free bags, which we all had. We all put them in the overhead locker, except by the time we got to the other end, when we had to then open the overhead lockers, everyone had the same bag and couldn't figure out which duty-free bag they had. So that's probably something to discuss another day. But, that was my takeaways from that flight as well.
So that's how you get the plot of Home Alone 3.
Well, on that note, before you go into another tangent, we will move on. Rob, thank you. You've been a very, very good sport. Thank you very much for joining us.
Come back anytime,
Yeah,
Rob.
we're always welcome.
You're
always welcome on the show.